Ed DeMarco, I think I see you. I see your ear anyway. I understand you're on the other side of the world dealing with feedback.
CJ, can you hear me?
I can hear you squawking. You got some feedback going on, buddy.
Let's see. Let's mute that for just
a moment.
Are you okay?
You're having a little problem here. Stand by.
All right, I'm standing by. Well, my intrepid co-host Ed DeMarco, I know you're in the far side of the world. I think Hawaii is part of America still, right?
Depends who you ask. You know, a native Hawaiian might beg to differ, but yes, I am over here on the Big Island, and it is morning, other side of the world, about as far from Africa as you can get. And but yes, it's a beautiful morning here with the sun shining off of Mauna Kea off my right, if you could see it.
Morning in America.
Telescopes up on top. It's very cool.
Right on. Well, we had a little struggle trying to get together today. So you're on the exact opposite side of the world. I thought I was going to be in Cape Town. I had to come up to Joburg at the last minute. So here I am in my little hotel room. But we had booked this podcast for a very special segment on a country that we both know and love well, and that is Zambia. And you and I met on a plane ride so many years ago, both en route to Zambia, where you were, I believe, stationed with the American Embassy or had some USAID contract.
Well, I was the democracy and governance advisor / strategist for the U.S. there, working on trying to come up with new ways to strengthen and support them, and ended up launching what's become like the biggest program there. Not totally because of my work to get it going, because a lot of work of a lot of people to make it happen, but it's strengthening the local governance system and the local revenue generation so that Zambia can start to really move at the local level. And the president has embraced that program really strongly. President Hakainde Hichilema, or HH as most of us call him. So that's been gratifying, and it's I think doing what Zambia needs, which is helping to stimulate the local levels of service delivery for the public, as well as getting some economic development going out across the provinces.
Well, that's obviously a huge priority in most African countries. It's all about economic development. But we know that Zambia has been going through it's had a really tough couple of years, perhaps, driven, as we kind of pointed out, by the drought, which is, I guess, a product of El Nino, which has impacted everything from food security to energy availability.
The drought, I think, also, totally. And the drought, I think, has also impacted the confidence of the country, because Zambia had this sense that it had put food problems, hunger problems behind it, as a food reserve agency, and was stockpiling and kind of doing all the right things and actually exporting its surplus to countries in need. And now, the president had to declare an emergency in February because almost half of the crop that was planted failed. Most of that's maize, the staple crop in Zambia. And he said, HH said about 1 million families were affected. That's probably 30% of the population when you include parents and kids. So it's a real tough moment for Zambia because of that failure of the rains. And then on the other side of it, the failure essentially of power generation, because it's so dependent on water, hydropower.
So that's been a huge, that's had a tremendous impact, not only on local businesses, but on the GDP at large. A lot of people think it's shaved a couple of points off the GDP, and certainly, in our businesses, we have a number of hotels, and shopping malls that are operating daily, and they incur 12 hours plus of load shedding every day, where we are running on
Wow.
a diesel generator. And the bad news is it looks like that's not the worst of it, because the situation is it's not improving, and the sort of the lead time it requires to get renewable energy projects online, solar is definitely something that would work really well in most parts of Zambia, but it just can't happen soon enough.
Yeah, I see. We were looking into that earlier, and it looks like there's projects on the drawing board with investment from everywhere from the UAE to China, Canada, and you hope those projects will get going soon because the country is going to be facing some pretty tough growth constraints unless they can solve that problem. And you do hope that rains come in this next season in a way that keeps the farmers happy, because the country really can't go through another crisis like this, which is requiring massive food aid to come in. I think you are working or have worked on some of securing
Mhm.
some of that from some of the supply which is needed. It's got to come in from other countries because there's just nothing there. There's not sufficient grain.
It must be a very frustrating situation for the current government, because they're all business minded guys and they like the trains to run on time, so to speak. But you've got a situation where, because of the drought, which is a humanitarian crisis, which is driving inflation, which is keeping it, which is causing it to be very difficult to maintain control of the currency, especially against the dollar. And the more the currency weakens, the poorer everybody gets, because the more expensive financing becomes, the more expensive it is to import all sorts of things. But there's an ancillary uh, impact, which the brass ring for a lot of these countries is FDI, foreign direct investment, and it's kind of a beauty contest amongst African countries to get manufacturers and big conglomerates and multinationals to come and set up car factories or battery factories, or any sort of processing or manufacturing in a country. And you know uh, this has a really detrimental effect for a country like Zambia when they can't ensure reliable power, which further dampens the economic climate, which further sort of strains the local consumer. And sometimes you you don't know whether to cry or go blind. It's like just arrows coming from everywhere.
And that's the power problems which are in the cities, because something like only like 5% of households in rural areas of Zambia have electricity. Period. So a lot of people just live without it, or live with just going and getting their phones charged when they can. Maybe having a little solar for lights at night, but a surprisingly large portion of the population in Zambia lives in conditions that you would find in some of the poorest areas of Africa, parts of Ethiopia where I've worked, for example, and which shocked me, frankly, when I started working in Zambia.
Hmm.
So Zambia's got to develop a more inclusive economic story. That's another challenge it has, and I think HH is trying to do that. That's one of the reasons we're trying to get more going on out in the districts across the country, because you need more balanced growth. It's a very urban-driven economy,
Yeah.
and that's not capturing the whole population.
Well,
One thing to point out, yeah, sorry, CJ.
no, go ahead. Finish your thought.
Now, I was going to point out another. We're going to talk about briefly about the geopolitics of this, because it involves the clean energy revolution around the
Hmm.
world. But there's a democratic component to what's going on in Africa. The U.S. and its allies clearly want to see democracy well rooted and thriving in sub-Saharan Africa. And there's many challenges to that. Just look in the Sahel, where you have some Russian-backed regimes that have knocked out civilian governments. And the corridor that runs Tanzania, Malawi, Zambia is kind of the core, the focal area for the U.S. right now in terms of supporting, strengthening democracy, strengthening electoral democracy, as well as governing democracy, which is really critical. It's what happens between the elections and the democratic governance of the country, and making sure that's strong from the grassroots upward. So something the U.S. and something I've worked on in Zambia, also next door in Malawi, particularly in the past year or so, where I was actually leading U.S. democracy and governance work in Malawi. But those are the three countries the U.S. is focused on. So when those countries are in an economic crisis, that can translate into pressure on their democracy for the very reason that, as you've said, people got to eat, and that's their number one priority. They're not going to be thinking about governing their country if their bellies are empty. So it's critical to get the economies in a stronger position that will support the kind of democracy that Africa's young people need, because we know Africa's youth boom is upon us.
Yeah, no, that's a good point. And as you were talking about these things, I mean, Africa is really susceptible to, because the infrastructure is, starting at such a low baseline, and they're rapidly, improving infrastructure. And there's a lot of foreign investors and actors from other countries who, whether it's China or the EU or Japan or South Korea, Sweden, the United States, Canada. I mean, it's amazing, the melting pot of communities and development finance institutions and agencies that you will see kind of descending on this part of the world. And it's really easy to hear with that narrative, the drought, the inflation, the governance, Al-Shabaab, the Sahel, all that kind of stuff, and forget what is on the other side of the coin, which is another narrative. It's a narrative about the fastest growing population on the planet, the African population. Zambia happens to be one of the fastest urbanizing countries in the world, and is the most urbanized in Africa right now, because it's such a big country and so empty in so many parts of it. Lusaka, where we've both lived for 4 or 5 years each, happens to be one of the top 20 fastest growing populations in the world. And
I did not know that. That is, you have dropped a key fact on me.
That's a knowledge bomb, man. I'm dropping knowledge bombs. And then
I'm feeling the blast wave all the way out here in the Pacific.
As you should. And then finally, I hope you feel this one. The holy grail of consumer brands is the youth demographic, and the youth bulge in Africa is second to none. And in the next 15 years, the average age in Zambia, or the next 5 years, will be 25 years old. I think currently the average age in Africa is about 19 years old, sub-Saharan Africa. And so that's why you see this sort of surge of interest in terms of fast-moving consumer goods, FMCGs as they call them, brands and groups that do infrastructure from fiber to data centers to physical infrastructure like roads and bridges and all that kind of stuff. Obviously, power is always going to be an enduring opportunity in a place that's growing that fast. But this is all sort of the bulwark behind all this growth is basically a very energetic group of people who are aspirational and who are on the move, and they're moving towards the cities, and that creates all sorts of opportunities. Hence the title of our podcast. Do you remember the title of it?
I do remember it. I do actually remember it. It's Rush for Africa, and there's good reason to call it that. Not only because we rushed through our microphones to do this podcast, but and not because I'm not in Africa. I'm not rushing from Africa, but there is enormous international interest. We're going to talk about that in other episodes, as well as our main podcast that will get underway in a couple. You actually start to see it in about a couple months, but. many countries are coming in. I mean, for example, Indonesia is one. Not that hasn't gone into Zambia, but Indonesia is one. I've actually talked to their Africa people in their foreign ministry, and their the Indonesian president made a major visit
Mm.
at the end of last year to kind of underscore that Southeast Asia's largest economy is coming into Africa in a bigger way. But we're also talking about within Africa, and go back to the youth boom for a second. Hakainde Hichilema, the president of Zambia, was elected on a landslide. It's almost unheard of in Africa for a leader for an opposition leader to be elected by a landslide, and he was elected by almost 1 million votes margin,
Wow.
predominantly because the young people of Zambia wanted a massive change. They wanted a mandate for change. They gave them that mandate for change. And unfortunately, as we've seen, multiple shocks then kind of hit his strategy. The Russian invasion of Ukraine, which jacked up inflation all over the world and caused other issues. The debt crisis that he inherited,
Yep.
which is was bigger, I think, than he even realized, and then the drought now, the El Nino induced drought, which has affected not just Zambia but other countries in southern Africa, and has been really severe. I think it's the most severe drought in 100 years in Zambia, or roughly that time frame. So basically, in the modern era of Zambia, Zambians have never seen anything like this,
Yeah.
where basically half their crop fails, and it's just a critical problem. So yeah, I think there's increasing attention, and Zambia's got a lot of people rooting for it and want to see it, go in the right direction, succeed, and have that prosperity that I think it's capable of achieving.
It seems like there is a momentum behind that particular narrative. I mean, you know, when we talk about Zambia having a breakout moment, there are some medium and long lead things that indicate whatever short term pain, something's happening. You know, we're
Yeah,
talking about Zambia is strategically blessed in that it has so many of the minerals and the inputs for the new economy, renewable economy, circular economy, um, to thrive. And it sits across the border, obviously, from Katanga province, which is the southern province of DRC, where so many of these green metals are, the coppers, the cobalts, the manganese, um, the lithium, the rare earths, the on and on, tin, tantalum, tungsten. This happens to be the sweet spot on the planet for many of these minerals, and so the United States, as you well know, has done a tripartite agreement with DRC and Zambia to get. They want to see processing, battery manufacturing, and value addition here at the source where all the key inputs are. And this is going to be a long lead thing. I mean, we hear little rumors about Elon Musk floating around Congo or Zambia buying a tin mine, or Bezos doing the same. Cobalt, which is a big minerals explorer, is they've just found some massive copper find, and there's still a lot of sort of undiscovered areas of Zambia. For the viewers that don't know, Zambia is known as a mineral country. It's driven by copper, but it has a plethora of minerals. There are so many other uh, aspects of the country that are rich in terms of resources, from tourism to ag to human capital and fishing and all that stuff. But it's the mineral economy that really has driven the country forward. And so there is a lot of focus on that particular area. And it just so happens that for the next umpteen, 20, 30, whatever amount of years, this area is going to be huge. Oh, and the point that I wanted to make was the cobalt is backed by a consortium of guys like Bezos, Gates, and Musk. So the guys are securing their own assets, but they're also backing companies with new technologies that can really efficiently kind of zero in on where these resources are. And I've learned that there are new technologies in terms of smelting and processing where instead of like separating the copper from the gold from the cobalt, it can go into one thing and then it all comes out separately. The efficiencies uh, have been incredible, and AI is actually playing a big part of it because so much of sourcing and finding these deposits has to do with big data, and big data sets. And
Yeah.
so it's a really interesting time because I think that so much of what's driving the new economy right now and all the sort of those exponential technologies are going to have a really significant impact on this part of the world in particular.
So that's a good point to mention the Lobito corridor, which is the biggest rail investment by the United States in Africa. You generally think of rail, the Chinese building, the Turks are building a lot of rail in Tanzania, and they're probably going to build in Uganda as well. But the U.S. has this big strategy where they want to, they call it reshoring or friendshoring, where basically they're trying to create an alternative supply chain, get it out of Chinese control. Right now, China controls an enormous portion of either the raw supply or the process supply of almost all these things you just mentioned that go into electric vehicles, also into some renewables, renewable battery storage, wind energy, wind turbines, and so forth, magnets that are particularly used to supercharge those. And these electric vehicle batteries take a huge quantity of these minerals. I think something like 20 kilograms of cobalt per battery. And we know that the demand for these vehicles is rising sharply around the world. So everybody's scrambling to find not only those minerals, but like you said, there's more esoteric things that are used in some of the magnets and so forth. Namibia's a source for some of those that people are going after. And the idea is literally to get these things on trains that are going into the Atlantic basin, into the U.S. and toward factories in the U.S. and North America and Europe. And that is expressed in this Lobito. Lobito is a port in Angola. Angola borders Zambia. And there's an existing rail line that the U.S. wants to see refurbished that would run all the way potentially up into Copperbelt, Zambia, and therefore could become this kind of dedicated output to the rest of the world of what's coming out of Copperbelt. There's the what I call the investment arm of U.S. foreign policy called the International Development Finance Corporation, which is considering a loan right now of over $500 million with a B dollars to revive that rail corridor. And if that goes forward, then we're going to see this project really get moving quickly, and we'll stimulate development there. The UK, of course, Zambia is once part of the British Empire, is Northern Rhodesia. The UK is coming in and saying it's going to put billions of dollars into Zambia too. Amazingly, a year ago, the then Foreign Secretary of the UK cleverly came to Zambia, and that was the first visit by a British top diplomat in 30 years. So you're seeing like all of a sudden like countries are waking up to what's going on in Zambia, and it's a lot of it has to do with the mineral wealth that suddenly has this powerful new market. But it's not just that, right, CJ? There's all kinds of other things that you can do.
There's so many other things. I mean, I want to just add to what you just said. I mean, logistics. The United States got rich when it built the highway system, essentially, and goods and services could flow. And Africa's always been constrained by that. I mean, try and get stuff from Durban to Central African Republic, or try and drive from Kinshasa to Lubumbashi. It's just it's a nightmare. And even in the air routes and stuff, it's still very irrational. But the Lobito corridor is going to create a lot of wealth and a lot of access to a lot of goods and services, minerals, and other things that will drive a huge wealth transfer. But yeah, so we're talking about Zambia having a breakout moment, and I think these long lead things, these investments, these very long-term investments that the EU and the United States are making, kind of indicate where they see the future, and where they're, where they're putting their money, so to speak. Um, but for us, mere mortals who don't move, sovereign funds, there are so many opportunities. I look at the Africa opportunity. I mean, we came here as investors, basically, and we got very involved in real estate private equity, as you know. But there are so many entry points for investors, from ag to manufacturing to goods and services, fast-moving consumer goods, processing. You don't have to be a miner; you can be in the processing space. Um, uh, the brands are, they're driven by youthful consumer demographics, and they whether they're big box stores, or sports teams, or luxury goods, everybody's trying to get an early mover advantage in Africa. And one of the industries that I'm involved in, which is the hotel industry, what I've seen since I've come here in 2011, 2012, is that brands are looking to push in, and they're looking to develop a network in all the key capital cities, the secondary cities, because that's how you win. Like, think of Hilton, or Hilton Garden Inn, rolling out across Europe, or rolling across America. The logistics to do the same in Africa are different, and requires a different sort of commitment, a different sort of execution style, and a different approach to capital markets. But the guys who have the stomach for emerging markets, developing markets, um, find that it's a very, very exciting space to play in. And for the private equity guys, the investors, the funds, there's more and more becoming these very successful local businesses that are making big money, big margins, and are doing local listings, and going to Joburg and listing down there. And oh heck, let's try and list up in London. We can do a listing up there, and so you're seeing a lot of M&A activity, and I see a lot of people poking around looking for opportunities like that.
Yeah, and you always talk about, what in the property business, location, and that's something I would point out to my Zambian friends when I was living there. Pull out a map and say, look, you've got 8 countries, 8 markets surrounding you, right at your borders, and including the Democratic Republic of Congo, which is now part of the East African community.
Mm.
Tanzania, which is going to be one of the most highest growing populations in the world
Yeah.
over the next 30 years.
Yeah.
So you've got a relatively small population with a lot of resources that you can tie into, and you could be that logistical hub. You could be a market for other countries, but also a logistical hub for Central Africa. A lot of ways that Zambia can go if it establishes its strategy in a clever way. And so this critical minerals thing is the biggest, the biggest sort of example of that at the moment. But as you say, there's lots of other things for Zambia to grab onto. We probably should highlight a few headwinds that are out there right now, and we've talked about inflation. The debt restructuring has moved ahead to some degree, particularly with the Eurobond investors, but it's not fully done, and that has really taken up a lot of the government's time and attention over these past 2-3 years.
That's been painful, I think, for
It's
everybody.
been very painful. I think much more painful than expected. And then the Kwacha has been really in a tough spot. I was looking back, and the Kwacha, right after HH was elected 3 years ago this month, August of 2021, the Kwacha strengthened. There was a lot of optimism, and he had kind of a 1-year honeymoon where the Kwacha stayed around 16 to the dollar. Now it's up around 27, which just amazes me that it's that weak.
Yeah.
And there's an IMF program, or IMF lending program right now. This is more on the good news side of things, because one thing HH did was ask the IMF to come in and do a sort of analysis of the economic fiscal governance of the country and recommend ways to strengthen it. And they have been making progress on that. And the IMF releases money as they kind of hit different benchmarks. So at the end of June, Zambia got, I think, $540 million. So I don't have the exact figure here, but over $500 million tranche of that funds. And the IMF said we're going to boost up the envelope, as they like to call it, by another $400 million because of the drought and the food crisis, which has cut the growth forecast in half for this year. So Zambia is just going to struggle to get through this year. But as you say, if it can then kind of take its compass out and kind of reset its true north, then it can get back on track on these bigger pieces, which are fundamental to its long-term growth.
Yeah, I would agree with that. It's the prospects are medium term. It's got a bunch of stuff to iron out, and nature's not been kind this year. So a lot of the issues are sort of supernatural, so to speak. But there also is the utility infrastructure, which is having such a negative impact on the economy right now. Is a story of neglect over many decades, and I think that there is a sort of a sense that Zambia has to invest in itself, especially with the burgeoning population, the exponential population growth that it's experiencing, and it presents a lot of opportunities for outside investors, but it really presents a lot of opportunities for Zambians as well. And what I've kind of noticed, we got here around the same time, probably around 2012 was the first time I started spending time in Zambia. I'm in Joburg at the moment, but and things were a little slow, and the kwacha was 5 to the dollar, and they were building a mine, and there's another shopping mall. And now it's like everything is happening so fast that every time you turn around and take a new route to the office, you see a new building or something. I was just in I was just touring a building being a $60 million hotel, which would be the tallest building in Zambia, and it was being built by an Emirati company that just kind of they're not Zambian. But they just kind of they put their money down, and we think Zambia, we think Sudan, we think Angola, and they just started kind of making these sort of long-term investments. And when Africans and Middle East Africans are noticing growth trends or markets that are welcoming or good places to kind of park real assets, then it's worth taking notice. Now, Zambia. Go
I
ahead.
was going to ask because one of the big ideas out here is that Zambia can develop manufacturing. That they don't just ship all their copper, cobalt, and other things out to the coast to go elsewhere, but that they can actually start making some of these electric vehicle battery packs and all these other things. Now, I've talked to some people who think that's unrealistic to make that leap. How do you see it?
Well, the way this normally happens is that some group, it's sort of like BMW going to Alabama, right?
Yeah.
Some group that has the talent and then kind of becomes a local company, so to speak. They sort of, it's sort of like they seed the DNA that is required and the training and whatnot. And I think that can happen. I mean, it's funny because Zambians are very, very, aspirational. They're educated. They're not jaded. They want to work hard. They want to, I've really enjoyed getting to know Zambians, and I think the one thing that it limits you when you come from a relatively smaller country. I mean, Zambia, for the most part that I've been here, has been 12 to 15 million people. I think it must be about 20, 21, 22 now. But that's not 80 million people. That's not 60 million people in Tanzania or 55 million people in Kenya. And as the population gets bigger and there are more influences, your reference points become different, and you start having bigger expectations or aspirations, and I think that's a big part of it. I think Zambians, um, if anything, they're too modest sometimes,
Hmm.
and you know don't take what they're capable of, and that's kind of a cultural thing. They're very, very warm, polite, and respectful people. Um, not like not like the people that we come from, or the
We're
opposite.
throwing things.
You know,
They're not throwing things.
but you can't stop progress, and I'll give you a perfect example. When we built the urban Lusaka, we kind of did it in an industrial chic style, with
Yeah.
exposed ceilings and ducts, and the concrete was exposed and all that stuff. And
Great
some
bar, by the way. If you're in Lusaka, hit the
great
bar,
bar.
hit the Jackie O. It's great stuff.
I get a silver bullet, but don't
Yeah.
take more than two. um, and a lot of the people in my peer set were like, CJ, this is not New York. Zambians won't understand this. They won't understand why you didn't paint the concrete. They'll think you ran out of money. And I was like, well, anyway, we opened the damn place, and I tell you what, Edward, they loved it. The young people, the young set, and the exposed international Zambians, they understood it, and that's because we're all watching the same stuff. People are getting more affluent. They're traveling. People are sending their kids overseas. They're all on Pinterest. They're all on Instagram. And what I think is that there's this kind of cultural creep and experiential creep that's happening that just can't be stopped. And we're all kind of building our communities around what we value and not necessarily where we live.
We were talking earlier about how Zamrock, the psychedelic fusion interpretation of 1970s rock, has a revival going on. And so it's always cool when a country has like a cultural touch point. And the revival is happening in New York, by the way, or at least there was some
Is it really?
an old Zamrocker was discovered to be playing in New York somewhere. But the writer went to Lusaka and he went deep on it. He went through like some of the old haunts and the different bands. And I have a friend who's a big fan of Zamrock, so I think she's very excited about this.
You gotta appreciate Zamrock for what it is. For people that don't know, which is probably 99.99%, Zamrock was this moment in time where Zambian musicians just fell in love with the sound of the late 60s in America and maybe the UK. And so everything sounded like the Byrds or Jimi Hendrix or just these incredible bands that sounded like they belonged on American radio. It was actually shocking. It's great music. I'm glad it's coming back.
Yeah, that's super cool. And you got writers, one that I read who's great. If you haven't read The Old Drift, which is a sprawling family saga, but also sweeps in all kinds of Zambian history. It's really fun. The Old Drift by the writer, I'm going to get this wrong, but I think her name is Namwali Serpel. She teaches at Berkeley in California, but it's a great novel. Check it out if you haven't. It came out in 2019. And you learn a lot about Zambia by reading it too. But yeah, so what's our verdict here, CJ? Were we going to take the question mark off of breakout moment and say it is a breakout moment, not a breakdown moment?
I think it's a breakout moment. I think, as we discussed earlier, there's a lot of pain points, but as you said, adversity is the mother of invention, and also the mother of imperatives, and it looks like a lot of the structural. Sometimes you just have to have a really bad sickness before you get yourself in shape. When you have a cold, you don't lose the weight. You don't but this has been a really traumatic period for a lot of people, and a bad hand handed to a new government who I think has really tried to manage it as good managers would. Um, I, you and I are both the same. We traverse a lot of the countries in Africa, and Zambia to me is still one of the key entry points because of its size, its strategic positioning, and also because of all the goodwill and support it's been getting from key players in the international community. It has everything it needs to,
It
to
has a lot of that, and it's a safe country. It's a country you can drive across, and you feel like no one's going to shake you down or going to you're not going to be dodging any gunfire or anything like that. It does have a lot of these things. Now, there are 2 years left in HH's term. The next election in Zambia is scheduled in August of 2026. So his administration does have to put some points on the board right now, starting with getting over the hunger crisis, getting the agricultural economy back on stable footing, and hopefully getting the rains that they need.
Yeah.
Because while they are trying to expand irrigation agriculture on a large scale, particularly up in the Kushi district, I think it is in the north on the DRC border. That's a long-term project. Solar is a long-term project. These things are going to take years to appear on the grid. So unfortunately, we're going to have to rely on Mother Nature to deliver to get those harvests back up. The irony is that the very thing that will ultimately drive Zambia's economy, the sun, is the thing that's really hurting it right now because it's baking. They baked the country back in January, February, where I think some farms only got like 3 weeks of rain. It was really, really terrible. The worst in probably 100 years of drought. And it's also kind of an indication that climate change overall is making these issues, is magnifying these issues, and irrigation's got to be a much bigger part of the equation. But hopefully those things get taken care of and things get back on a good track. Any indicators you're looking for that would say to you, yeah, we're now moving up again?
Look, they've got to get more confidence in the currency, and obviously the things that we talked about are all part of it. Getting the energy situation more stable. So it can, a lot of the a country's sort of narrative and confidence is driven by, the perception that it's well run. And when you don't have stable electricity and stuff, that undermines all that. But here's the thing, Zambians aren't going anywhere, and they're as capable as a lot of the foreign investors to make the changes that are needed in the country, and they take the long view. We've been there 10 years. We think that the real estate market has kind of bottomed out, and it's a good time to be in. We also see a lot of really investable companies that can do international listings or be acquired or sort of uh, can add value to larger consortiums to get more reach and extract more value out of the companies. There's a lot of really smart business people, Indian, Zambian, European, a lot of Chinese who've kind of localized and become Zambian. If you just look at who's doing the hard work and who's grafting in Zambia, it seems to me that everybody's kind of banking on the long term. It's going to be, you're going to have to tiptoe a little bit through the rocks and shoals for the short medium term. But I think that Zambia is going to be one of the bright spots in this part of the world.
And I hope it's, like you mentioned before, it's not just the capital, because often the capitals, whether it's the political or the business capital, get all the attention. But these second tier cities and towns, which is why we were working, well, I was working to get this U.S. aid development project underway, local impact governance, because we saw the potential to strengthen what we call the subnational system, both to strengthen revenue generation, fiscal revenue the governments can use, strengthen the governance system so people can have a say in how it's used. And then HH came in and massively scaled up the funds that were going out to these local areas to give them kind of a shot in the arm, a real confusion of money at the grassroots level. So that over time should really start to spread the economic story and beyond just Lusaka and Livingston, and start to get some of these other areas. For example, I'm very bullish on Chipata, which a lot of people just drive through Chipata down in Eastern Province, but I think it's really beautiful area and has huge potential. So, we hope to see more good things happening. I think we're going to take our question mark off and declare it a breakout moment. And
official.
I'm going to declare it morning in Hawaii. I don't know if I mentioned it's where I am. Tomorrow is Hawaii's 65th birthday as a U.S. state, 50th U.S. state. So I guess Hawaii's entering its retirement years.
That's great.
I don't know, but it's good morning from aloha from Hawaii, and evening.
It's a good. It's bar o'clock time here in Johannesburg. I just want to say, look, if Edward and I are big Africa files. If you're an investor or interested in development, I encourage you to reach out. Ed DeMarco is a very, very cool and experienced cat with a lot of contacts. I've myself run a private equity group as well as a fund management group, and we're really bullish on this part of the world and love providing insight and information to groups that want to come into this neck of the woods. So,
more episodes coming, right, CJ? We're going to have something on Morocco, where you were recently. We've got planned episodes on Kenya, Ethiopia, South Africa after its election, and a whole bunch more. So the
Zimbabwe
full-on Rush for Africa podcast is coming soon, and it will be a big thing, we hope.
We look forward to seeing you there. Ed DeMarco, so good to see you. Yeah, get a town.
Signing off for the Pacific. Take care.
All right, signing off. Thank you, everyone. See you next time.